Hi everybody, today we're going to talk about Ruth. So for spoilers, the only one you have to worry about this time is Crisis, or if you haven't read the second series, the Before the Cure series, I don't think I'll spoil anything there, but just in case, if you don't want any spoilers for the second series, maybe skip this one. So Ruth is actually my oldest protagonist. She is the first character besides Vincent that I wrote that was older than me. Vincent is about her age, but he's not the main character, so I don't count him. And Juliana is a little bit older than her. So she is 45-ish at the outbreak of the plague, and in her early 50s by Crisis. Juliana and Vincent would be probably mid-50s. I'm just saying that because I don't know if I was ever clear in the book about their ages. I don't think I was. I think I left it vague, but that was the intent, was that she was kind of older. I think Hazel in the second series is probably about her age too. That's everybody else is kind of mid-30s, late 30s, except for the kids, obviously. She probably her biggest motivating factor is actually the guilt that she carries about her son, about not being there when he died, and about keeping him living the way that she did. So she was in a no-win situation there, and I'm actually glad, in a way, that my husband, remember we talked about Marnie and how my husband stopped reading my books after the scene with Marnie and Phil peeking in her window. That's when he stopped reading my books. And he basically, I knew that when I wrote Crisis, and if he hadn't, I don't think that we would have gotten Charlie at all. I think I would have started the book farther on after he was gone and Bill was gone, like in the present day. One moment. Excuse me. This was probably the hardest book for me to write at the time. The kids were all very small. I want to say Laura was 7 and the boys were 2 or 3. Because of that, that was probably the hardest book opener to write. But also, excuse me. Also, I think probably the most intense, like I was proudest of that book of all of them. I still am the proudest of that book of all of them. And I don't think that'll change, honestly, in this series. It was a lot closer to my own life as a parent than even the others were. It was the first time I dared to make a parent, because Henry was a parent, but he wasn't really, like, he was a kind of chose to become a parent rather than, just having grown up with Marnie. What else can I tell you about Ruth? Not a lot without spoiling. I do intend to go back to her and Seth. That was the plan for the next book. This story that I ended up writing kind of got in the way a little bit. And like we talked about with Bernard, the second series is kind of why we didn't get a Bernard and Ruth book, but I do intend to go on with Ruth eventually. Probably not the next book. The next book is going to be the book I should have been writing over this past year instead of the book I did write, but you haven't seen the last of her, and I do like her as a character. I think she, except for Shirley, she is the second most asked about character. But she's also pretty much right there on the page. There's not a lot to say about her that's not already there. But if you have questions, as always, leave them in the comments and I will try to answer them without spoiling. Yeah. And we'll talk about Juliana next time. Actually, why don't we just do that right now since we're here. So, actually, before I move on, for Ruth and Juliana, I wanted to recommend another book with a pair of friends that I really liked. It's also an apocalyptic book, but it's not zombies. It's more bunker-esque. It's called Rubberman's Exodus. It's actually the third in a series, but I read it as a standalone, and it worked just fine. Like, I didn't read the other two until after I had finished, and it worked just fine. It was really good. Very atmospheric, but not as heavy as you would expect, which is why I'm recommending it now. So I will leave a link to that in the comments. And I will also leave a link to another book called Since Tomorrow from Morgan Nyberg, who influenced me a lot in the very beginning. It was one of the authors I read right when I was starting out. And remember, I was talking about the hundreds of zombie apocalypse books I was reading at the time. His is not a zombie. It was just an apocalypse event. But one of his plot points was control over a marijuana field as a narcotic, basically, in the apocalypse. And I didn't... Growing up in Maine, it's legal here now. It wasn't when I was growing up, but there was a lot of marijuana in Maine for years and years and years. And I didn't think there would be as big of a fight over it as his book, portrayed. That being said, I am going to link the book because I really think it's a great apocalyptic book because of the realism of it. Besides the marijuana field part, it captures the feeling of being post-apocalyptic very, very, very well. And I particularly like the first book, Since Tomorrow, yes. And I will link that as well. The reason I'm talking about it is, as I was writing Crisis, I again knew I needed to control the infected at some point when they release them. They couldn't just open the doors and then hope that they didn't get eaten. So I was thinking about that book when I chose poppies instead of marijuana. So Juliana is a retired home ec teacher, and she loves the botanical gardens, so she would know which plants they should save or try to save. And Ruth, being a physician and having traveled most of her city to find some kind of treatment for her child, would have had some idea. She would have turned to other remedies pretty early on after medicine failed. So she would have kind of had some idea of where to find the information about how to turn the poppies into something that could put the infected to sleep so they could release them. So that is why there are poppies in the story. Juliana, as a character, is kind of what I would expect a lot of people to actually do in this situation. Like, not necessarily run an asylum full of other people's families, but I would expect a lot of people would not give up on their family members. If they were not killed in the outbreak, they would keep them, like Ruth does, like, you know, her clients do, and like Juliana does. They would try to hang on to them because they're sick. They're just sick people, and they would try to help them. So Juliana was meant to be like the stand-in for all the families that didn't immediately run away from their infected and tried to help them. And what happens, like, naturally as a parent or, you know, a guardian of somebody who can't take care of themselves, is you fear what will happen when you're gone or when you're incapable of caring for them anymore. And that's kind of the motivator, the character arc for Juliana, is having to come to terms with the fact that she can't help these people anymore, and she is desperately trying to find somebody to take her place in a world where there isn't anyone to take her place. Ruth and Father Preston are the only ones who can, and she is just as aware as Ruth is of Father Preston's problems, of his overbearingness and his need to preach and things like that, but she also knows that he got better. He knows what it's like to experience being ill, so he knows what these people are going through. So she's leaning on that, hoping that between him and her friend, Ruth, that someone will take care of these people. And it's a struggle for her to accept that she has to let go, which I think is hard in real life as well as fiction. Like, there are people that have no one, that know that their loved ones are going to suffer without them and don't have a choice, which I think is very, very difficult. So that's Juliana, basically. That's her arc. Okay, so tomorrow we will talk about Phil, and I will see you later.